Bueno, José María Alfaro, soy maestro cervecero de Cervecería San Simón, profesor de ACAS de hace un tiempo. La entrevista será en su mayor parte conducida en inglés. Ryan tiene conocimientos básicos de español, pero como vamos a ocupar el lenguaje técnico, prefiere utilizar el inglés para poder dar de mejor forma la información. Bueno, parto por pedirle a Ryan que se presente. Hi, Ryan.
Hola, gracias. Mi nombre es Ryan Brooks, de compañía SouthNorte, previously from Cervecería Coronado. I've been brewing for almost 12 years this year. BJCP, National Judge, Certified Cicerone, and I love the questions that came in, so thank you for joining today.
Great. Well, Ryan, this is our fourth interview. It's the one that we've received more questions, so that's really nice to have people engage in it. So we're going to start with the questions that are already in place, and then we're going to take some minutes to talk about the questions that come up in the chat, right? Cool. So, well, let's start from the beginning. You've been in the first line there, yes. So, in your words, what would be the evolution of American IPAs in the last 20 years?
Well, I've only been drinking them for maybe the past 15 years, so I was a little late to seeing what was before me. I know there was IPAs when my dad was growing up on the East Coast. Ballantine was one of them. And what I've read, what I've seen is they were definitely hoppy and bitter, but balanced though with enough malt. Later, probably in the 80s, when craft beer became more popular in the United States, I think a lot of the people started using a lot more caramel malts and were trying to balance out that bitterness that used to be there with a heavier, sweeter malt character. That's like your old stuff from the 80s on the East Coast into the Portland and Seattle early 80s craft breweries that were definitely more English influenced. And I believe there's a lot of bad textbooks out there that talked about those IPAs being really malty and dark. And I don't know why those brewers did that. Maybe just because they thought that was the way to do it, or people weren't interested in bigger, bolder, bitter beers. But here in the West Coast and San Diego especially, very low crystal malt character since probably the mid 90s. Like when Stone came around, it was nothing but real pale malt, a little tiny bit of light crystal malt, and then big, bold bitterness. So I think it's really regional. I don't know how much it's changed over the past 20 years. I think it's just different styles in different areas.
Well, I see. Well, you already said it. They're like these regional tendencies. How would you describe the difference between these currents in IPAs in the United States these days? You know that.
Well, I don't think there's really much of. Everyone's doing all the different styles. So like you can go to San Diego and get some really good.
Sure, yeah.
Like get the hazy beers that were influenced just 10 years ago on the East Coast. So, but I think that even the East Coast brewers are making West Coast style IPAs. So I think there's just so many different IPA flavors out there, and everybody wants to make all those types of IPAs. I like seeing people doing session IPAs, West Coast IPAs, more malty, balanced IPAs. Like you go down to Cigar City in Florida, those guys are making some pretty malty IPAs, but they're just balanced and easy drinking. So I don't see, other than that little quick trend that popped up with brewed IPAs, I don't see a certain area doing something different or unique. They're all everyone's doing what everyone else is, like everyone's copying everyone. There's lots of different styles.
Silenciado.
Sorry, my microphone was off. I don't know why. Yeah, I know that we are all making West Coast IPAs, hazy IPAs, but if you had to define the styles that are having are being brewed more, because it's like in the World Beer Awards guide that we have these emerging IPAs where we have the black IPA, red IPA, hazy IPA. They're all a bit mixed up. How would you separate them a bit?
Yeah, it's really tough to do that. I think like the BJCP does, where they do break them down into just basically color or ingredients. If it's a rye IPA or a white IPA using Belgian yeast, it's tough to categorize a lot of those things because it's such a broad range. So I think just by color or ingredient.
Yeah, they are right now being defined in anyways.
And then it's funny, you look at even the World Beer Cup where they had 3 different kinds of hazies, and they're really breaking it down to strength. Is it just a hazy pale ale, or is it a hazy IPA being closer
or juicy?
Or juicy, yeah.
Juicy, hazy, yes. But for example, going on with the questions, in California, it's like a playground for IPAs. How would you describe the different ways of doing it? You have this more harsh bitter beers from like Stone Brewing, or the ones that you used to brew in Colorado. In Coronado, what are these different? How would you describe the California ways of approaching an IPA?
Since in California it does not rain very much, the water is really terrible here. It's super high in minerals. And I actually thought about if I could present something. I'm trying to pull this up. If I could show a water profile that we've tracked for a couple of years, like a year or so at Coronado, and it shows how poor and how bad it is. So I'm gonna real quick just I'll share this screen real quick and look at how much the minerality content, how high it is for being in California. We're stuck with some of the worst water down here in Southern California. So let me show you this. It's got the total dissolved solids, the total alkalinity, and then it also brings up some of the sodium, potassium, calcium. So let me share this real quick. Water report. Show my screen. Oh, it shows more of the U there. Hold on one sec. Oops. Water report. Behind it. There we go. Can you see that? Does that work?
And right now,
probably very small, huh? Well, it basically shows how much we're in in the over 100 parts per million of sodium. We're in the over 100 parts per billion or per million of calcium. It's just very extreme, crappy water. And part of that is good because we have so much high minerality content that you can really make these bitter beers pretty easy because there's so much mineral content. The hops really seem to pop and shine through real well. So that's why we were kind of stuck with our shitty water. And it turned out that you can make pretty bitter and strong, full flavored IPAs pretty easily by putting only just 1 pound to 2 pounds per barrel. So it's on the higher side, but not what some of these people are doing on the East Coast or with the really soft water, having to put 3 and 5 pounds per barrel. We're lucky enough to get enough bitterness pretty easily with our crappy water.
Yeah, so that would explain the different approaches in California. But
a West Coast IPA here in San Diego, it's pretty easy to put in a couple pounds per barrel. I think a good 10-barrel batch, a lot of people can understand. So in a 10-barrel batch size, we're putting anywhere between 1 pound to 3 pounds at the beginning of the boil. Then towards the end of the boil, when we want some of those bigger, more aromas, we're putting in anywhere between 6 to 15 pounds in a 10-barrel batch at the whirlpool at the very end. So that we're getting enough strong bitterness in the beginning, really the big shot at the end to get some of the flavor and a little aroma. And then dry hopping on a 10-barrel system, we're doing just over 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds per barrel. And that's our solid, normal IPA that we're training. Every kind of hop we can get our hands on. It's always about 1 or 2 pounds at the beginning of a 10-barrel batch, and anywhere between 6 and 15.
Yeah, we're going to get a bit more in that as the questions go on, but let's start from the beginning. If we're going to talk about ingredients, first of all is water. You were just talking about how hard and how mineral is the water in South California. What's the water profile that you would recommend for a West Coast IPA?
Well, I think you have to have that pretty high chloride to sulfide ratio. You want a higher chloride to sulfate, but less than 100 parts per million would be perfect. And you know, the more I've brewed in different countries, in parts of Mexico and other parts of the United States, water is definitely super important. It's, you know, it's 95% or 90% of what we're drinking. Yeah, but there's so many rules that I've seen, and people go away from the rules or stick to them very well, that it's almost like you have what you have. You can treat this water, yes, but until you taste the beer, that's when you start needing to be making these changes. So I didn't understand water for the first 8 years of my brewing career. To me, it was black magic, and I didn't understand a lot of these numbers. So I took what I had, which was crappy water, and either watered it down with reverse osmosis water or deionized water if it had too much of a minerality or kind of water flavor. And if it didn't have enough, you'd put in a little calcium chloride or a little sulfate just to soften some things or bring things up. And I will go more in the notes, but I did notice that it said, are you putting it in the mash? Are you putting it in the kettle? We've done both, and I haven't noticed a huge difference, but I think you have to be real with your beer. You know, you can control a little bit of what you've got with water, but taste it and then start adjusting things rather than here's a set guidelines and structure that everyone reads on these things. And I've seen people change their water to be very this way, and their beer before they changed the water was better. So I think just because you follow certain guidelines doesn't mean the beer is going to taste the way you want it.
Sure. Yeah, and in a way, it's you can here in Chile, at least in Santiago, we have really crappy water as well. So yeah, of course we have osmosis, but yeah, that approach of solving the hard water in some reverse osmosis water is nice because you can work with what you have. So
yeah. A lot of times that's really expensive for a lot of people to buy those reverse osmosis systems. So just like looking at the history of brewing over the world over the past 500 years, that's why some styles were brewed in those places, because their water was this way and these beers tasted better. So styles over lagers and lagers over IPAs, things like that.
Try to do the best you can with what you got. So, well, you went over the question that was next about how you add minerals.
Yeah, I think when I like to do it, I like to split it up, or even just mostly in the mash. I feel if you've got a good extraction, those minerals will carry over. But if you don't feel like you're getting that, maybe half in the mash
and half in the kettle. Sure. Do you make any? Oh, sorry.
Oh, it depends. I think a lot on your water. Here in San Diego, again, with it being so terrible, we have to add lactic acid or phosphoric acid to bring the pH of our water down. Our pH of our water is easily in 8.2, 8.5 sometimes. So we can't rely 100% on just putting in calcium chloride and calcium chloride and gypsum in the mash. We have to, for me, acidify the mash to get down into a 5.2 or 5.3 we want it. Then add in more of that calcium and calcium chloride, gypsum, something like that, in the kettle.
Yes, so you mainly adjust the pH in the mash. You don't adjust the brewing liquor before?
No, we really can't, because it's constantly getting filled all day long, so we can't adjust it. We have to adjust it in the mash first, and then we check the kettle during the boil and see where we are, and then we can adjust again.
And after the mash, do you adjust a bit the pH?
Yes,
Because
we start trying to getting it perfect in the mash first to carry over, but we'll check it during the boil just to make sure if it's changing, dropping, or going up, and change it again.
Yeah. Do you have any pre-boil pH standardized or just the mash?
5.2, 5.3.
5.2.
Yes.
Yeah, because I've read about how the pre-boil pH has an effect on the bitterness perception. So when it's lower, the bitterness is like a more gentle, right?
Mm-hmm.
So 5.2 is a good pre-boil pH to try to achieve.
Yes.
Nice. So let's go with the malts. What do you feel about using crystal malts or any specialty malts in an American IPA?
Well, it's two things: crystal and specialty.
Yeah. Oh.
Definitely a fan of using some different malts, like even different base malts, like Golden Promise, or English base is really nice. In my IPA, I like to use a little wheat. That helps a little of the flavor and the fruitiness come through. I've had a lot of good IPAs I've made with a little biscuit malt or a little of the or tiny bits of honey malt. Tell me what else? Rye malt. But as far as crystal malt, I don't mind a little crystal malt as long as it's less than a level bond of 40. And the higher the level bond, the less you use. So if you use a level of 40, crystal 40 or crystal 30, I'd probably use maybe no more than 2%. Yeah, and if you're using a crystal 10, maybe you could get up to 5%, 10%.
Oh.
So the darker, the less I use, just because I think.
What about wheat?
Wheat?
Usually
about anywhere from 10 to 20%. Personally.
10, yeah, sure. Well, nice. Well, we have a suggestion. Maybe if you could talk a bit slower to help our not English speakers to be able to get it a bit more.
Yeah, sorry.
So we went on over the specialty malts.
Crystal malt, yes. So
yeah. One question. I have a particular question about it. Is there any hops that you would recommend to use? Maybe any kind of malt to balance it? Maybe some very strong malts, hops.
Yeah. I think if you're using a lot of maybe a medium crystal malt and you want to balance that heavy crystal malt flavor, using an aggressive hop like Columbus or Chinook, that would probably help fight some of the strong malt flavors. Yes, I do agree with that.
And at the same time, if you are using a lot of Chinook, maybe you can add a bit of crystal malt to balance it out, right?
Sure. Yep.
Nice. So, what would you? It's your opinion about using like sugar to make a drier IPA, or would you prefer only like all grain?
No, I do like using a little sugar on a lot of the IPAs. I think it's a cheap way to increase your alcohol without having to purchase more grain. And It does help a lot of especially a double IPA, be drier and more drinkable. That's an old Russian River trick that Vinny did 15 years ago or so. And it's very important, I believe, on the big IPAs. Anything over 7 or 8%, I think, should be a good percentage of sugar to help dry it out and to keep it drinkable.
Nice. And what kind of sugar do you prefer, like dextrose or table sugar?
I've done table sugar. I've done brown sugar. Dextrose is extremely cheap, so that's usually what we're using on a production scale. So definitely the cheap corn sugar dextrose, it works great.
Good. Give me a little second. Chicos, por favor, a todos los que están conectados, les reitero, porfa, que desactiven sus cámaras. Veo que hay varias activadas para que el uso del ancho de banda sea menor y que salga todo más fluido. Y ahora, bueno, vamos a continuar. So, just getting back to it, you don't have any preference towards any kind of sugar?
No, I mean, really, when you start looking at a production scale, whatever is cheaper is usually used. And at that point, it's almost sugar is sugar is sugar is sugar. When you're using just a little bit, hopefully less than 10%. So I don't see, we didn't notice a big change when, like an idiot IPA at Coronado, we changed from using brown sugar, which was expensive, to using a cheap dextrose. And that seemed to work just fine, did not change the flavor at all, and we saved a lot of money.
Oh, nice. So I know that we have a lot of difference in the base malts available because of the geographic situation, but what kind of base malt do you particularly recommend to use in an IPA?
Well, a lot of the newer IPAs that seem to be much more hop focused and less bitter, you want to have some kind of nice malt flavor. A good base malt of using American water is amazing, or Golden Promise is awesome. But if you're a production facility and you need to cut costs, a good old American two-row or Canadian two-row is just totally fine. I know that the Patagonia malting is really good. Their base malt would be perfect, just because an IPAs should be more focused on hops and maybe a hop balance, but there's so little malt to worry about that I don't find myself, other than maybe one or two times a year, doing something fun where you're doing 100% English malt base beer. But really, when it comes down to it, you're trying to make money as a business, so we just focus on a clean, good American or Canadian two-row barley for the base. You're looking for sugar and a little bit of color.
I get it. So let's get into yeast. Well, we all know that we're looking for, at least in a West Coast IPA, something really neutral. But do you have any particular yeast that you like?
Yeah.
When brewing an IPA?
Yeah, I've started off brewing IPAs with a lot of 007 from White Labs, the dry English yeast. It was liquid, but it was their dry strain. I don't mind. A lot of the English strains are pretty nice. There's a lot of really good dry yeast that work great. I even like the hazy strains, those London strains, and the juicy ones, if you can ferment them warm and just filter them, they make really nice IPAs. So I think I've tried about 5 or 6 that I really like, but I usually just go back to good old 001, the Chico strain, or the English dry strain, or the 001, 007, 13.
So you that way, do you prefer a high attenuation yeast over something that maybe could produce some esters?
I think that's when you start. That's your balancing act. If you have a yeast that is low attenuating and is pretty sweet, that's when you can really change your bittering units and really charge it pretty heavy in the beginning. If you have something that attenuates very well and it comes out really dry, that's the kind of beer that we're pushing more of the hops towards the end of the boil and a heavy dry hop to make it balanced. It's basically a balancing act.
Yeah, like brewing it's a bit like that in every style. So great. Now we're gonna get into hops. Sure. IPAs are a hop-forward beer. So let's start with. Do you think that there's one hop that it's just that you can't avoid? Can't avoid that has to be in your beers or any sort of mix that you like? Citra.
You put Citra in a lot of beers and it's great. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Strata. That's a new.
No, here's. I don't think it's in the market here.
A couple more years, you guys will have it because they're pushing a lot of that in Oregon and in Washington. Strata is probably the best hop I've ever tried in my life. It's not like Citra on steroids, but it has the most characteristics for one single variety that I've ever seen. Usually single hop IPAs are okay. It's a nice way to showcase a single variety, but Strata was the only hop I've seen that tasted like there was 5 different hops in it.
Cool. Strata. No, yeah, I think it's too new to get down here, but we'll keep an eye when it's available. Is there any other like hop blends that you really recommend or you really like in your beers?
Mm-hmm. Well, Coronado, we were really a big fan when I first got there with the blend of Columbus and Chinook. And as old school as it sounded, it was still such a perfect variety or to kind of meld together. You got your really piney, danky, and then you got this big kind of danky, fruity, and together that worked really well for us. I still really enjoy it. But what I've learned in the past few years is what you get from when you order hops is so different from time to time. And if you don't get to actually select what you want, you're getting a blend of whatever they have left. And it's usually a good blend, but I just have learned a lot in the past few years seeing good Chinook, okay Chinook, and terrible Chinook. And that's with every variety. So there is no such thing as like the perfect blend. It's like it's what you pick out, what you have there. If you get your Cascade is going to be different than my Cascade, going to be different than my neighbor's Cascade. Yeah, sure. So it's what you have. How is that hop tasting? How is it performing? What can you use with that hop to make it what you want? So there's no magic bullet. There's no poem that says this is exactly going to happen every time. You have what you have, and you need to make it work with the flavors that you want to get out of it.
Oh, I see. Is there any process you particularly use to assess the hops that you're getting? Maybe some kind of evaluation?
The simplest way is to take a finished beer in the lab or in your house, put a couple pellets in it, let it sit closed for a day or a few hours, and come back and smell it. See what it's doing in your beer.
Yeah, so in a finished beer. Nice. Now let's get a bit into the brewing process. Particularly, this is one question that most people have. What kind of mash do you like to use, or do you recommend in an American IPA?
Well, we like to do mostly drier IPAs. So we're looking at the 150 degree Fahrenheit, between 148 and 152. Can we do that in Celsius?
Yeah, please. If you could use the metric system, it would be really, really useful. I'm not really barrel pounds. It's hard to me. So.
Where am I here? Volume currency. Perfect. Can't even find it when I need it. Temperature calculator. Have all that stuff on here too. One sec. Here we go. Let's see. Fahrenheit 1. We're looking between 65 is usually what we're targeting for. No higher than 66 and no lower than 64. So between 64 and 66.
So on a constant temperature, you don't make any steps or anything?
No. No, I've never brewed an IPA that had a step mash in it. I've always done it single infusion. I let the step mashing for Hefeweizen, wheat beer, German lagers, things like that. Simple infusion works great. You're promoting hops here. You don't need to worry about extreme fermentability and malt extravagance.
Nice. So it's pretty straightforward. What do you feel about mash hopping?
Absolutely love it. I started doing mash hopping just a couple years ago, testing new batch beers for SouthNorte, and I had heard that Ballast Point was doing a lot of their Sculpin beers with a lot of mash hopping, And it doesn't have to be a really exciting or expensive hop. We've done it with the cheapest hops we could get our hands on, cheap Cascade, very inexpensive Columbus, inexpensive Chinook. And we're only putting in about 2 or 3 kilos per 10 barrel batch. So it's not a lot. And we have to put it in on the very top of the grain bed at the very end of mashing in. Otherwise, it can give you some slow runoff problems. But the flavor you get with mash hopping is something different. It hangs on to different oils because of the different temperatures, the different pH. It pulls oils out that are not normal in the kettle. So I do really like using a little bit, just small amounts of mash hops.
Mash hopping, nice. What about hot side aeration? Do you think it's a relevant matter, and what advice would you give to avoid it, if it's important?
Homebrewer growing up, they always talked about avoiding hot side aeration, and it made sense, so I followed the rules. When I got at Coronado at a big production facility, and I watched how the wort entered the kettle from the very top of the kettle, and it ran down the sidewall and kind of splashed the whole time. And as it was filling, it was splashing. And I thought, well, we're still winning awards. The beer tastes amazing. I don't understand this whole hot side aeration thing. And I think there's certain points during the brewing process where it does matter. I think that while you're keeping oxygen out of everything, or every process is the best use. But what I've really seen is you have to be careful when you're whirlpooling. We've got a lot of beers that were inconsistent when I was at Coronado, and we didn't understand why. And there's been new research coming out, especially in that new hop book that Janish published, that talks about people in Japan, either Kirin or one of the big breweries. Hold on a second. You got to beat these kids up. The hot side aeration during whirlpooling and where you're putting in the big charge of hops, that's where these negative flavors were coming out. Flavors like, I can't think of the word in English, calabaza, like pumpkin and roses.
Pumpkin too.
A lot of these weird kind of vegetal flavors were coming from hot side aeration during the whirlpool because of two things: either the speed and the kind of, it was harsh, or
splashing or turbulence,
splashing, aggressive whirlpools, or when we had a problem with the pump was actually sucking air in while we were whirlpooling because the leaky seal. So that started causing a little bit of that flavor, and we only noticed it randomly. We didn't understand where it came from. And when this book got published, it made a lot more sense to me that the hot side aeration during the whirlpool was a really big area where you can cause problems.
That's really good advice. In your opinion, first wort hopping has a real effect on the perceived bitterness, or?
I think it does. I think there is some science behind it. I think there's some people that have done some good research and good studies. I first started seeing it at AleSmith here in San Diego. They were doing it not because of softening the bitterness. They were doing it out of, their kettle was so full during the boil that if they put hops in during the first 60-minute addition, that it would boil over. So they started blow up. Yeah, they would start putting in first wort hopping just out of necessity, and their beers, I think, were superior because of that. So there was probably some history that they knew about, and then they started trying it, and it worked for them. I've tried it. I like it a lot. I like the combination of a little bit of first wort, or a little bit of mash hop, then small first wort, then small bittering, and then leave the rest towards the end of the boil and whirlpool.
Yeah, hops all the way.
All the way, yes.
All the way. Well, you were just talking about that. Even in South America, where we don't have that much tradition as you working with hoppy beers, you always get these new tendencies, like maybe get all the hop off the kettle and put it all in the whirlpool. So maybe it's a bit the same that you were talking, but in this like hopping, how do you manage the addition of hops in beer, and what do you how do you feel about adding hops in the kettle during the boil?
Yeah, again, I think a little bit of bitterness is good. I think the times that I personally have done 0 hop additions until the last 5 minutes or whirlpool, the beer lacked a lot of complexity and lacked a little bit of that flavor. So I think you do need to have a little bittering in there. I think a little bit in the middle is okay, but when you really want to get the aromatics and some of the flavors, it has to be whirlpool. But you can't just rely on the whirlpool. There's steps and there's reasons why you have a bittering addition and middle additions, as well as a very important ending in whirlpool additions.
Yeah, maybe working with a little bit of hops in every step of the way.
And again,
it makes a lot of sense.
Yes, and then again, taste the beer. Is it overly aggressive bitterness? Well, maybe shift directions a little bit, or maybe it's a little too malty and sweet, and it needs a little of that bitterness to help it become more drinkable.
Great. What about how fast do you feel that it's important to cool the must, and how would you recommend like an amount of time?
Yeah, I think a lot of the books talk about we should be doing it in less than an hour. We would always shoot for 45 minutes to an hour, depending on size. You know, I mean, if you're on a 30-liter setup, hopefully we can get that done. I don't think there's a negative way. Faster has to be better. The faster you can go to get it cool is the best way to go. I have seen people have negative effects on their beer, had problems with their beer when they allowed the whirlpool to whirlpool too long or to sit too long before they cooled it. And it's definitely a DMS flavor, but it's not what I was taught DMS. It's definitely more of a hop vegetal DMS flavor rather than like a can of cooked corn or canned vegetable. It's a real, I guess vegetable or vegetal is a correct term, but not what I was in my mind thinking. So I have tried beers with extended whirlpools that had negative effects.
And in that way, how many time would you allow the whirlpool to stand? Like 30 minutes, 20 minutes?
Two things. I guess it depends on the setup. So one place I brew beer at, the boil kettle is the whirlpool. So as soon as we're done boiling, we turn off the steam and start whirlpooling and adding hops. It takes about 15 minutes to get to speed, and then adding hops, and then we let it sit for another 15 to 20 minutes, depending on after it's stopped going. And we usually don't see much movement. At Coronado's facility, where I make a lot of the SouthNorte beers, they pump from one kettle, they pump over to the whirlpool kettle. That takes 20 minutes to fill the whirlpool kettle. Then it takes another 30 minutes to slow down and stop. Then it takes them 40 minutes to transfer through the heat exchanger. So it's been moving for over almost 2 hours.
Yeah. But in this setup, when that's the model, for example, for home brewers, they only have one kettle, so most of them at least. So just like you turn off the heat, get to speed, add the hops. How much time would you recommend to leave the master stand?
I think anywhere between 10 and 15 minutes is fine.
It's good. Okay, nice. And well, I guess that you work with a Hobson. How much time do you like to use it, and at what temperatures do you feel that has the best results? Or do you prefer only using the
Hop stand?
normal whirlpool without lowering the temperature? Yeah, the hop stand.
That's really difficult to do at the production facility. We've tried many different ways of doing it. Really what you have to do, in my eyes, is you have to get the beer, the wort, the must down to, let's see, hold on, I gotta get the temperature again. It's 170 degrees Fahrenheit or 76 degrees. So definitely below 80 Celsius to make that effect work. You're basically getting it below the isomerization level. The two ways of people doing it that I've seen is pumping it through the heat exchanger, and then once the wort gets down to below 80 C, then they're adding the hops, because a lot of times a heavy hopped wort will clog up your heat exchanger, and that's the whole point of using the whirlpool. So it's very difficult for most commercial brewers to get below 80 Celsius to
80 degrees.
Yeah.
Well, if it's possible, if you get it under 80, but maybe a little bit easier for home brewers. How long do you let it sit at that temperature, or do you think that would be a good amount of time?
I think around the same time. I think if you're doing as a home brewer,
same time as a whirlpool.
Yeah, I think the cool thing about if you can do it as a home brewer, high gravity brew, use a water calculator, a watering back calculator, and add cold water to get your volume up, cool your wort down to 80, and then do your normal 10-minute. That's an easy way to do that for home brewing side.
Yeah, that's interesting. So let's see. Let's go. We have a question here. Now let's leave it that for a little bit later. Let's go into fermentation. What's the pitching rate that you use or feel that?
Yeah, we always follow
fermentation.
I always follow the good old 1 million cells per milliliter per degree Plato. That's anything between 12 Plato or 1045, around there. Once you get over 1060 or 1070 or 15 Plato, I think it's important to do 1.5 million cells per mil per degree Plato.
Oh.
And then when you're in high gravity, definitely 2 million cells. So I mean, a good hefty. So if you're doing, again, I'm going back to the 10 barrel model. You probably put about 10 liters of yeast per batch. That would get you a pretty good start. I always feel pitching a little heavy is okay with a lot of the English and American strains that are very clean and neutral. Over pitching is not going to affect the flavor and ensures that you have a very strong fermentation, clean flavors.
Nice. What temperature do you like to start the fermentation?
A lot of times,
I know that there are a little different with the strains, but like a general orientation.
Generally, we are trying to transfer out of the heat exchanger from the kettle at anywhere between, looks like 16 C to start out with, and then we'll set the tank.
Pretty cold.
Set the tank to about 20 C. So I like to start out colder for the first, less than 24 hours. Knock out colder at 17 or 16, and then set the tank to 20. Let it get there and
let it rise.
Yep.
Great. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Anything more? I guess we'll talk about these hazy beers. We found that the only way we could get the hazy beers, juicy IPAs, to ferment out completely and get the flavors we wanted, we had to raise the tank after the second day of fermentation. We had to raise the tank to 23, almost 24 degrees. We would start at 20, and then we bring it up to 24 after day 2 or 3, and that really made a lot of difference.
How would you describe that difference?
Well, the biggest thing was fermentability. If we did not achieve that 23, 24 Celsius, it would stop fermenting, and it would be too sweet. It just stopped.
Yeah, sweet. Yeah, okay.
You had to get it warm let it actually complete the fermentation. And we would do two things. We'd raise the temperature to 23, 24, and we'd actually dry hop. I know this is part of the question coming up, but we dry hop during fermentation. And that's really what got the juicy flavors to come out, was raising the temperature and then dry hopping during fermentation.
During fermentation at that 23, 24 degrees Celsius.
Yes.
So, well, that's really interesting. What do you think about using a mix of yeast strains in IPAs? Have you used it?
Yes, I am a huge fan of doing that. It's very hard to capture that yeast after fermentation and use it for multiple generations. If you can kind of grow it up and do your own blend. I've had some of the best IPAs with a blend of American and English, but after time they will start to modify. One outcompetes the other, and you don't get a 50-50 split of, say, English to American yeast.
Yeah, I've heard that maybe up to 5 generations that it keeps the balance.
Yeah, we saw 3.
I've
Anything after 5 became weird.
Yeah, and in the case that you're not growing your own blend, do you like to start with one yeast strain and then add the other, or just pitch it?
I've personally on a real, like a non-homebrew level, only done 2 at the same time. Homebrewing, I've done Belgian first, and then knowing that the Belgian strain was not going to get the alcohol I wanted, I would put in California ale yeast. But that's something that I've never really tried on a bigger level.
Well, that's great. So for example, what oxygenation rate or aeration rate do you use in your beers?
Yeah, I do. I've always been trained to use between 2 and 5 liters per minute. On lagers, we'll do 5 liters per minute. On high gravity beers, we'll do 3 to 5 liters per minute. But I was shocked a few years ago at a really nice lager brewery in St. Louis that they were only using filtered sterile air. And I didn't think that was possible. I thought you had to use pure oxygen to get the perfect fermentation, especially on lagers and higher gravity lagers. And these guys proved me wrong. So that's another thing that I don't know enough about. I've always was taught, and there's always do usually 3 liters per minute through about 40 minutes of transfer time. I don't have the math on that or the science to back it, but I believe that there's other ways to get around it. Maybe it's a pitch rate balance to oxygen balance.
Yeah, because you're using you're going a bit into the heavy side of pitching rate, so maybe you don't need to care that much about aeration.
Yeah.
And do you use any nutrients during fermentation, or do you rely on the nutrients in the malts?
That's a good question. The nutrients that we're using at SouthNorte, and I use the Coronado, was just it was the carrageenan of the Irish moss. Then we moved over to using a combination of Irish moss as mostly a protein coagulant, but zinc sulfate as more of the real nutrient in there. The only 2 things we're throwing in, like kettle coagulant, and then the nutrient comes from the zinc.
Nice. So let's get into dry hopping.
Sure.
What are your general feelings about it? How many additions do you do? Difference at different temperatures?
Yeah, I've done it all, or I've tried to do it all to see what I could get. Normally, what works best for me is pull most of the yeast off after it's almost done fermenting. It's basically done. Pull the yeast off, 1.5 to 2 pounds per barrel is about what we like to see. But after the hazy craze and we started playing with that, I do think if you don't need to use the yeast again to recapture it, you can dry hop during fermentation. And any style of IPA is beneficial. I think you're getting a whole different kind of flavor, a whole different reaction, the whole biotransformation.
Biotransformations, yeah. It's a mix between with the next question, but what would you explain a bit your experience with biotransformations?
Again, this is just from a background of tasting and seeing and watching these flavors throughout a couple years. I'm not a scientist behind this, but there's two things that I've seen. There's definitely more of a mix when you put the hops in the tank, that there's actual currents going on through fermentation of heat changing and the yeast falling and rising. That carries the hop throughout the tank a lot better. Before we knew about this, we would always use CO2 to blast and raise the yeast up, raise the hops back and forth if they would fall. But there's also, I think, a yeast and hop meeting. Like they help each other out and they promote different flavors. So definitely it's a more fruity and soft kind of flavor, and sometimes that's good and sometimes that's not so good. I think it depends on what you are looking for in your beer.
And the interaction between that particular kind of yeast and the hops. Right?
Sure. There's not one solid answer. You need to try it with the ingredients that you have and the yeast you have. But I do believe adding hops during fermentation has a whole different flavor than if you took those same hops, the same amount, and put them after fermentation.
Yeah, and you just talked about about dry hopping at 24 degrees Celsius.
Yep.
Most of the literature tells you that
Yeah, I think, but that temperature swing between 20 and 24 wasn't a huge difference in the flavors we're getting. The flavor that really came was from the yeast being able to ferment that high or that warm. But what I do see, and this is an old San Diego way, people used to dry hop, I think around maybe 10 or 12. Let's see what that is. Yeah, like probably, about 12 or 13 Celsius. People would they would bring the tanks down to 12 or 13, pull the yeast off, then dry hop that cold, and that's a whole different flavor. Between 20 and 23, not so much, but you get down to 12 and 13, that's really different to me.
In how would you describe it? The difference is it better or cleaner or
depends on what you want. I think it's different. Yeah, it's definitely less fruity, definitely less resiny, more herbal, more spicy, more peppery, maybe a little more green vegetal.
At low temperatures.
Yes, in the 12, anywhere between 10 and 13 was much more herbal, spicy, green, less fruity, less resiny.
What about maturation? How long do you feel is a good time if you let it sit on the hops, or do you think it's better to dry hop for a limited amount of time, cold crush, get everything out and let it mature, or how is it better with the hops on or without the hops?
That's a good question. I think that there is a time. It's again a balance. You need to have enough contact time of the hops with the beer to get the flavors you want. After more than maybe 3 days, maybe 4, I think it's too long and you need to pull those hops off. So another thing that we've played around with is multiple dry hopping. So during multiple dry hopping, we'll add the hops, let it kind of do its thing. Shh, hold it, you got it. Hey, shh. Multiple dry hopping. Where we'll add it for 3 days, let it do its contact time, and then let the hops come off. We'll take them off. Then we'll re-dry hop and then let that sit for another 2 or 3 days, and then pull those hops off. So I think as long as there's a chemical reaction going on with the oils being pulled from the hops, and once those oils are pulled out, you don't want that green vegetal grassy matter there. You want to get that off. So there's again balance between, are you extracting oils or are you letting green material rot and die inside your fermenter?
Yeah. And what about when you get the hops, the final, how many charges do you usually use? 2, 3?
2 is nice. I do a light charge in the beginning, just a few, maybe, I'm trying to think like numbers of 10-barrel batches. We're probably doing 3 kilos in the beginning, and then pulling that out for 3 days.
All right. You got stuck. We are having a bit of a connection problem.
There we go. Now it looks good now.
Yeah. You were talking about the light charge at the beginning?
Yeah, usually about 3 kilos, and then letting that sit for two days, and then coming back with anywhere between 5 and 6 more kilos.
Nice. And once you get the hops out, do you let it mature a little bit in the tank, or you just cool?
Yeah, we like to take about 2 days to kind of cool down slowly. That's more for any kind of yeast shock flavor. And if we have the time, it's nice to just let it kind of, like you said, mature. After that, it's basically carbonate and biofine, or pass it through a centrifuge, or pass it through to a different tank and let it get carbonated off of any kind of yeast or hops.
Nice. Do you have any criteria when you any criteria do you use for mixing hops?
Yeah,
you choose the hops you want to use, maybe.
Yeah, the easiest way is just CO2 gas through a racking arm or through a side port. We tried pumps before, and a lot of the pumps, the centrifugal pumps, will pull oxygen in, and it stales the beer early. So I don't recommend most pumps. They do have some pumps that are like a bladder pump, or I'm trying to think of the name of it. Basically just kind of pushes the beer softly and doesn't allow any oxygen to pick up. Those are really nice too. But good old CO2 gas works great, just to burp the tank 2 or 3 times, maybe once a day, twice a day, just to keep the hops mixed in. But the other good point I want to bring up, people, these hop pellets have changed so much in the past few years. You asked earlier about how do you test hops in beers, and I said you could take a pint glass and put pellets in. And the other test that I think is interesting is take a couple pellets, put it into a glass, and see, do they stay at the top and kind of expand? Do they go to the middle and hang out, or do they fall to the very bottom? And depending on the variety of hops, the pellet, the actual pellet itself, there's so many different variables in there. That's going to determine what you do with that tank. If you have a lot of pellets that fall to the bottom of the fermenter, you want to get those up multiple times in a week or a few days. If you have hops that sit at the very top and make like a paste or a layer, you want to break through that layer with CO2 so they fall through the rest of the beer. So it's interesting to see the actual pellet itself and what it does in beer.
Yeah, how it is. Oh, that's a really nice advice. What do you think about fining? Do you feel that you can lose some aroma or flavor hop-wise, or
yes,
would you not recommend it?
I think that most of the fining agents will take a little bit of that aroma away, but not. I'd rather have a clear beer with a little less aroma.
So it's getting a bit.
Is it good now? Check 1, 2, 3.
Tiene la cámara activada. ¿Quién era el secondary? Si alguien tiene la cámara activada, por favor que la desconecte. No, parece que no, pero bueno. Me parece que está estableciendo un poco mejor la comunicación. Could you repeat what you were just talking about,
Sure.
please?
I think that biofine or some of those clarification agents like I think is it okay, I can't think of the name. Biofine is what we use the most. There's another vegan-friendly form of gelatin kind of thing. It does pull a little bit of the aroma, I think, from the beer, but I'd rather have a clear beer and a good yield, because the clarification agent does help with yield than a hazy beer. So I think what you lose in biofining or clarification, you can always just add more hops to the recipe to balance out what you need to be. But the thing that I've learned the most about loss of aroma in maturation and final product is I had a problem with putting 10 barrels into a 20-barrel tank, so only halfway filling a fermenter. During that, and they're all IPAs. And it didn't matter if it was a 20-barrel batch, 60-barrel batch, or 120-barrel batch. When you fill a fermenter halfway and do a hoppy beer, ton of aroma gets lost in the headspace of a fermenter. So I noticed that, like, oh, I don't care about a little bit of loss in aroma because of biofine. I do care about having huge headspace inside a fermenter. A lot of the volatile aromatics do go into that headspace, and you can't get them back.
Yeah. So at what time would you recommend to do this fining? After the second dry hop?
After the second dry hop, yes, but you need to have the tank at close to freezing temperatures. You need to have it between 1 and 2 Celsius. That really is the only way that the biofine or the clarification product will work at its best. I'm also a fan of not putting the clarification ingredient, the biofine, whatever, Nalco is another one. Don't put that in the fridge. Keep it room temperature so that when the reaction hits between the liquid and the beer, it forms the negative and positive ions, the connection, and actually drops out and makes the beer clear.
Yeah.
So beer needs to be cold.
Nice. Do you have any recommendation towards lowering the losses that dry hopping generates in brewing? Because you're gonna have a lot.
Yeah, it's a problem because of two things. The hops are like little sponges; they suck up the wort. The second problem is they don't like to compress and compact at the bottom of the fermenter and the cone. So the thing that we found the best is using biofine is the best we've seen over Nalco, over gelatin, and allowing the beer to be under pressure, about 15 psi, 13 psi, for a few days after you add the ingredients. So it needs to be cold, under pressure to compact the cone, to push all the trub, after trub, any yeast and hops to the very bottom of the cone, and you can use a racking arm to pick up where you need to be. But allowing 3 to 5 days cold, and you can constantly rack the bottom to get the hops off, will get you the best yield. That's probably the only way to do it. It's hoppy beers never create a good yield.
Nice. Regarding dry hopping and this this is not about dry hopping. What do you feel about the discontinuous hopping, like the one that Dogfish had? Yeah.
I have never tried that. I think the most I've ever done is maybe 5 hopping charges throughout the boil. I don't see why that wouldn't work, but I would want to shift the amounts. I wouldn't want to do the same amount every minute for the whole hour. I definitely want to push more.
You have it growing, right?
Yeah, it'd be too bitter of a beer unless you balanced it with a lot of crystal malt, which I know that beer was years ago, was very malty, very full-bodied, with a higher mash temperature to allow that balance to be created. But I think it's it's old school, and we found better ways to do beers.
Good, yeah. And regarding hop selection, when you have to pick two hops or three or four to blend, is there any criteria that you use regarding that, or just look at the profiles or your previous experience?
We make the beer and you taste it when it's done. There's no magic science. I mean, I think the worst problem out there is the hop companies are selling you these hops. So they want to make it sound better than it really is. A lot of the hops like lemon drop don't really taste lemony. People don't talk about Sriracha Ace. If you don't have a good Sriracha Ace, it tastes like a dill pickle. It's really what you have in your hands and try it. So, I mean, smelling it is great. You can make notes on what you have in your hands and what you're trying to achieve. You can take the hops and individually dry hop small glasses or small bottles and taste that and maybe make a blend that way. There's no magic answer. Again, everything I've seen in the past few years about hops is selection. If you can go to the actual farm and see it firsthand of what you want.
Oh, great. That's good. You think you take your time and experiment.
Yeah.
Now, there's a question about this hop burn. Many IPAs nowadays have this like burning effect in the aftertaste.
Yeah.
What do you think about it? Is it acceptable in some ways, or you don't like it?
I mean, acceptable. That's preference. That's to a certain judge. But I think a lot of us are on the same level. No one likes a hop burn or an aggressive taste in their mouth. A lot of these big New England IPAs, these IPAs, juicy IPAs have that, and it's because people are trying to push the limits way too far by adding, 6 kilos per barrel or 3 kilos per barrel, like insane numbers that don't make a lot of sense. I think it's got to be like 6 or 8 kilos, some big number that you don't need to be using. It's a waste of hops. It's a waste of money. You're basically hop hoarding at that point for some companies, and it doesn't make a good beer. I have seen some of these beers that are really terrible in the beginning become nice after about 3 weeks or a month. They got bell curve. They hit a nice high spot and they taste wonderful. But the hop burn is either because of incorrect pH or they're putting way too much hops in the beer and it's just useless.
Yeah, nice. And well, let's talk about the final step. IPAs are really oxygen and temperature sensitive beers. So, what is, in your experience, good practices about packaging, and what's the care that they need? Maybe you can talk a little bit about it.
Sure. I mean, that is the hugest point because the hops are the first thing to basically oxidize and give you bad flavors in beer. So the minute that the hops get introduced to the beer during dry hopping or even in the kettle, we'll go back to the kettle side, a reduced oxygen pickup. No, not outside of the kettle side. That doesn't make any sense because you're going to ferment it. But anything from dry hopping on through packaging, you have to be extremely cautious about oxygen pickup. I think one of the questions was the difference between putting peracetic acid in bottles for packaging and saying that can oxidize a beer. So a lot of what we're doing is using CO2 to mix a tank. We're using CO2 to purge piping, purge hoses, purge the filling lines, purging cans, purging bottles, purging kegs. The minute the hops hit the beer, we try to make sure that not one bit of oxygen ever is introduced to the beer. So CO2 is our friend, and we try to make sure that that's the only gas that the beer will ever see.
And given the cold chain and everything, it's can sound obvious, but maybe it's not that much. So you wouldn't recommend using peracetic acid in your bottles or bottles,
not
right?
for bottles and for can rinsing. Peracetic acid's great for stuff that you can kind of blow out and purge, like a bright tank or a keg. But micro droplets of peracetic acid water on a can or bottle can be negative. Everything that we see during the filling process is sterile water. So we rinse with sterile water.
Yeah, great. So we are done with the questions that we have had prepared. I don't know how much time we have left. Well, it's already been 1 hour and 15 minutes. Let me see if we have any other question here. Where there's a little bit of yeah, there's one question that maybe we all hobby beer brewers are getting our heads around it. It's like hop creep. What's your experience with hop creep? How do you avoid it? Or maybe if you could
that's
talk a little bit about that.
Really good question about hop creep and how that happens. What I think is different is mostly on the pelletizing side. Before, when these hop pellets were pushed through the die, the metal, it was so hot. It was maybe 120 degrees, maybe 130. So that's in Celsius. That is, you're talking over 50 degrees Celsius. So extremely hot temperatures. And that was just the way it was done. But what happened during that process of pelletizing, and even before pelletizing, also kilning in the hotbeds, was the temperature was, again, pretty warm. These pellets were basically heated up to where the hop enzymes were denatured. They didn't work anymore. So they couldn't do much. And what happens now is they're pelletizing at a colder temperature. They're kilning the hops at a colder temperature. So these enzymes are still awake and good to go. When these enzymes hit the dry hopped wort or dry hop beer, they start a re-fermentation. So if you do not allow the dry hops to sit long enough and actually cause a slight secondary fermentation, you're producing diacetyl. And people think, oh, I'm going to do my normal, people will do their normal 3-day dry hop time and just cold crash the beer and get the hops off, but they're not allowing for that fermentation, the hop creep, to occur. So the best thing that I learned to do, 2 things we've done: dry hop with the fermentation port open and just watch the fermentation after dry hopping, or dry hop the tank and close it and watch the pressure gauge raise up, and you know there's something going on, and constantly allow that gas to come off. But that's the easiest way, is to just watch the fermentation occur after dry hopping or taste it. And the best way to do it is take a sample of beer, put it into a warm water bath in a glass, and check for diacetyl. It might take an extra day or 2 on your dry hopping time frame, but you're allowing fermentation to reoccur and not allow diacetyl to be in your finished product.
Yeah. Have you checked how the difference in the alcohol level after hop creep?
It's small, but it's definitely a number. You're talking maybe 0.5% to maybe 0.25% a lot of times. It's significant if you're getting your beer tested by a laboratory. It needs to be very critical.
Yeah.
A lot of times we have a 0.3 degree swing in beer, so we were close at that 25% increase in alcohol.
I see. Is there any hop that you would see more hop creep occurring, or it's general between hops?
No, I've never heard anyone talk about that being variety or varietal specific or sensitive. I think it's more the kilning temperature and the pelletizing temperature. But you brought up a good point. If the beer or the hops that have higher oil content or moisture content, they would probably pelletize and kiln at different levels. So there might be a difference between high alpha and low alpha hop creep. That's not something that I've ever heard of, but I really like that idea of looking into that.
Nice. There's a really interesting question that raised up in the chat. Is there have you had any experience reusing dry hops for bitterness in another beer?
I have not, but I've only heard of one company doing this, and that was Ballast Point, was taking their spent dry hops, knowing there's still potential alpha acids there.
Alpha acids, yeah.
Yeah, and reusing that on the kettle. That's something we'd have to talk to Mr. Colby at Ballast Point about, because I don't know any of those studies. It's possible.
Yeah, but does it make sense? Yeah, it does make sense. You know,
it does make sense. It'd be very difficult. It'd be very difficult to know exactly what you're putting in weight-wise or volume-wise. But yeah, you could use it.
Nice. Is there any other point you would express about brewing an IPA for all our friends here in South America,
sure,
or Latin America, that you think is important and we haven't talked about?
Mm-hmm. There at Coronado, before I left to start SouthNorte, we were playing around with hop oils, and there's one on the market called Hop Zoil. It's HOPZOIL, Hop Zoil, una zeta. And that company makes these hop oils that you can blend with a high amount, like a 90 proof or 90% alcohol, just so, because it's so oily. And you can inject that through a carbonation port, or maybe even drop it into the tank. I've never tried that. I've always injected it in. And the hop oil was absolutely amazing by keeping the aroma strong and fresh for more than 2 months. Usually we have a 3 month to 4 month hop, a expiration date, I guess you'd say, or it's only good for about 3 or 4 months. But when we added this hop oil, it seemed to last a lot longer. And we've only just played with it for a couple years now, and there's only a couple of varieties. There's Azaka, there's Citra, Mosaic, Centennial, Cascade, maybe less than 10. But I think in the future you'll see more of those, and you'll see more craft breweries using that instead of the big dry hops. Because after a certain point, you can keep putting dry hops in, and you get very little aroma. So these hop oils that are distilled or steam distilled are really, really nice.
Yeah, I guess that they keep their stability way longer than
much longer
oils coming from pellets.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting. I hope we can get some in some of those hop oils really soon. And well, we have some final questions in a more relaxed way. First of all, what are you drinking right now?
Well, I was drinking. I got one little bit left of a Doppelbock. It was a collaboration between SouthNorte and Creative Creatures, which is a small company here in San Diego. They're really nice. We used a German Backlager strain, Munich 1, Munich 2, and a little Carahel, like a Carapils just for body, but 8%.
Nice. And what which would be your to-go IPA right now in San Diego, if any of us could go to a bar right now? But,
Yeah.
how do you feel about?
My go-to IPA that I can buy in San Diego that's a great price and is almost always less than 2 or 3 weeks old is Pizza Port's Swami's IPA.
Nice. I tried a Pizza Port beer, a collaboration Coronado a couple weeks ago. It was really nice. Really good IPA, West Coast IPA.
Yeah, there's New Zealand hops in it.
Last question. Actually, I didn't know about this, but could you tell us a bit about your rock band?
My band?
Yeah.
Well, before I got into brewing, I was in a heavy metal hardcore band called Life or Death. I used to also play for a band called First Blood. I played for a band called Folsom. I used to play drums for a band called World of Pain. So that's what got me into beer, was traveling around the world, in Europe mostly, and trying beers from Belgium and England. And that's why I really fell in love with brewing, was because of punk rock, heavy metal.
Oh, nice. It all comes together.
Yeah.
So, Ryan, it's been, for me as a brewer, it's been a great interview. There's a lot of really important information that we are going to, by all means, use and try to apply to make better IPAs around here. So, thanks. I hope this can happen again in the future with ACAS. And thank you. I know that many of the things that we talk are going to be really important for a lot of people around here. So thanks for taking the time and for being so open about this information and this knowledge. It's really great.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a good way because I've already missed out on 3 different travels because of this virus. So hopefully we can see each other in Chile or in South America or Mexico at some point. But I want to add, if anyone has questions and they just didn't want to put it up on the site of the page, to feel free to email me. My wife speaks perfect fluent Spanish, so we can translate any question if it wants to be in Spanish. I know it's not everybody speaks English, but I want to make sure that everybody has my email at Ryan B, as in beer,
Brooks
at SouthNorte. Yep, at SouthNorte.com. And if you want to give that, to pass it on to people, pass it on. I just want to make sure that the information is out there, and I'll always answer emails.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to go back to Spanish. Bueno, chicos, ahí nos estamos despidiendo un poco de Ryan, agradeciéndole por la excelente información que nos regaló hoy día. Los continuamos invitando a que sigan participando de la secuencia de entrevistas que se está haciendo en ACAS. El correo que nos dio justamente sería Ryan, RYAN B larga, @southnorte.com, que es el nombre de la cervecería que tiene ahora. Y bueno, le voy a dar el pase al Fabián para que eso, bueno, ahí lo acaba de escribir justo en el chat. Le voy a dar el pase al Fabián para que cierre la entrevista y bueno, muchas gracias por estar con nosotros hoy día.
Muchas gracias, José. Ryan, thank you very much. It's a very interesting topics what you talk. Really, thank you so much. Y en español para todos, desde ya le damos las gracias. Acá un aplauso a la distancia a Ryan. Muchas gracias por el tiempo. Y a todas las personas conectadas aún, los invitamos para el próximo martes. Martes tenemos la siguiente entrevista académica. En esa oportunidad estaremos hablando de un tema que me imagino para muchos de ustedes será nuevo y interesante, obviamente, que estaremos hablando con Steve Katz, acerca de hidromieles. Estaremos con Steve, quien es Grandmaster 10 del BJCP, el segundo ranking más alto del mundo, autor de un libro muy importante para la fabricación de hidromieles y una de las personas que fue de los responsables de la creación de el programa de certificación de jueces de hidromiel en el mundo. Así que los esperamos este martes para la charla de hidromieles. Muchas gracias nuevamente a Ryan, muchas gracias José, así que nos estamos viendo próximamente.
Goodbye, Ryan. Have a good
Bye,
afternoon.
awesome.
Cheers.